Hey guys, Dave Morelli here.
Ken Hackathorn with my old buddy Dave, and we got some new material for you.
New stuff? I promised it to you. Here it is.
Cool. What we're going to do today, Dave, is we're going to talk about the new Colt Classic 1911 pistol, the government model. But before we do that, I'm going to kind of bring you up to date on how Colt came to this gun and a little bit of the history on the Colt 1911A1 government model pistol.
Way cool, man. We're going to shoot some too, aren't we?
We're going to run some rounds.
All right.
Cool. All righty. All right, gang, what we're going to talk about today is the Colt 1911A1 government model. Remember, Colt has always referred to their pistols they've sold commercially as government models. They've never really been a big fan of using the 1911 or the 1911A1 technology or term, if you will. Because remember, that was a military term. But in 1923-24 time frame, the U.S. government decided they needed to make changes on the 1911 pistol based upon experiences in World War I. And among the things they asked for were things such as an arched mainspring housing versus the flat one that came on the original 1911. They asked for a shorter trigger, the relief cuts in the frame. They asked for a longer grip safety. You remember the original 1911, the short grip safety, especially people with larger hands tended to get bit by the hammer. The longer A1 grip safety solved the problem. Well, once Colt started producing 1911 A1s in about 1924 for the U.S. military, naturally they changed over their commercial production to the same configuration. So the gun that came about as the Colt government model from about 1924 on was basically a gun that was an A1. And this gun happens to be a U.S. pattern gun, but it's a commercial gun made in 1933. And the big difference is, quite honestly, commercial guns had a nice polished blue. The military guns had a more of a dull brushed finish because they didn't want a highly reflective gun. If you look at a gun from this period, pre-World War II, remember, height of the Depression, the quality and workmanship was unreal by today's standards. The gun, if you look at the slide to frame fit, it's fit beautifully. Everything on this gun is fit and polished, and it's absolutely a work of art. If you look at the pistol, still the old two-tone magazine. If you look at every feature on the gun, it matches, by the way, the 1911 A1 of that period. Still have small sights. You have a U-notch rear and a fairly small front sight. However, they are bigger than the original 1911s. That was also part of the improvement. As you will notice through the time of the passage of time, the sights tended to get a little bigger as time went on. But a pre-war Colt government model is actually a work of art by today's standards. Beautifully finished. Think about it, these things were charcoal blued. Before they went into the charcoal blue, which is kind of a heat oven bluing process, the way they degreased these things was they dipped them in boiling gasoline by today's standards in OSHA. Think about that, boiling gasoline. Something like this will never ever be made again. It's just not realistic unless you're a high-end custom builder, and as a result, you can get a gun from Doug Turnbull that will look like this, but you're going to pay a lot of money. So, first rendition of the Colt government model in the A1 configuration from about 1924 up to the beginning of World War II, in essence 1942. One interesting thing people don't realize, the military spec for the trigger pull on this pistol was 6 to 7 pounds. This gun mirrors that with a 6 to 7 pound trigger pull because that was the military spec. World War II kicks off. Naturally, Colt produces the 1911 A1 pistol, and if you compare it to the pre-war gun, the major difference is Parkerized finished, obviously not polished as well. They switched to the phenolic resin grips. Obviously, wood was subject to pretty easy damage, moisture problems, all sorts of things like that. So the resin grips were much tougher. They maintained all the other features of the gun, and like this one, you'll notice the front sight width on this one got a little bit bigger, and Colt for the first time started to going to what they call a square notch rear instead of the U-notch. But other features, for example, this one's a 1944 gun, so this one actually has a narrow hammer but still has the machine milled trigger guard, but it's also got this serrated mainspring housing. And you know, the collectors will go bananas and say, well, that's not right. Actually it is. This is an original gun. I bought it from the guy whose father carried it, or grandfather carried it in World War II. Remember, they weren't worried about collector value back then. They were just building guns. So a lot of times, you know, first parts in the bin were the last ones out. So like I say, people get twisted up about details sometimes, which are pretty bogus. Next gun, after World War II, Colt kicks back into commercial production of the government model. And the first guns they kicked out in 46 and 47 are guns like this one right here. Lots of GI spare parts, hammers. Still has the phenolic grips. These things went, for this time after the war, they went to a blue tank, a solution dipped blue. Guns were still beautifully polished, but they're a dip blue. They're not a charcoal blue, and you can tell a little bit difference. This is more of a pale blue. This is more of a black blue. But remember, this gun is a 1946 gun, so it's an old gun, although it's in great shape because it never spent hardly any time out of the box. 1947, or 48, excuse me. This is a 1948 gun I bought recently. Cool gun. Now you see, again, some changes. Now, this gun has aftermarket sights that I put on it. But it's still got the narrow GI hammer, basically the GI mainspring housing configuration, except they eliminated the lanyard loop along about 1947, 48. It's got a new serrated mill trigger, still using the GI phenolic stocks. Apparently Colt had a lot of these and the narrow hammers and a lot of GR parts still in inventory. Slide stops, still has the narrow old style thumb safety on it. This gun has got the polished blued sides and the matte edges. By the way, this gun came to me with about a little under a 5-pound trigger. This gun is incredibly accurate. I mean, I'm amazed for how well this gun shoots. It's pretty astounding when I got it. I didn't expect the gun to shoot this well. So obviously at 1948, they were still not turning out guns in huge volumes, but cool gun. By the 1950s, there were some more changes. Still the polished blued flats and the matte edges. Still got this gun, for example, this is about a 1954 gun. Still has the checkered narrow spur hammer of the Colt military series. Colt has now switched to their phenolic molded grips that have the Colt emblem on them. They obviously ran out of the military phenolic grips, and they've started injection molding their own stocks. But again, beautiful gun, nicely fit, nicely polished. By today's standards, this is a gorgeous gun, but guns like this are kind of hard to run into. Now, in about 1966, I was in the U.S. Army, and I bought at the PX a Colt government model. If I remember correctly, here it is. Here's the box that came in. If I remember correctly, it was $82.50 was my cost on this gun. This is a 1966 gun, and if you compare the 60s gun and the 50s, there's very little difference. They're almost identical, but a few minor changes. Now Colt has went to a serrated hammer. Obviously ran out of military hammers from World War II. They went to what we call the teardrop thumb safety on it, manual safety. But overall fit and finish is still very nice, gorgeous gun. Like I say, $82.50 for me in 1966 on a soldier's pay. Pretty good chunk of change. Now, let's fast forward to the 70s. Actually, in 1970, Colt introduced what they called the Series 70 Mark IV. Okay, and this is actually from probably about 1976, 77. Nice gun. A couple key things on it. They went to wood grips. The first ones were kind of almost looked like a barn siding wood grip, which were pretty tasteful. So eventually I went to a checkered pattern stock for the guns. And the big change, and most people don't realize, the Series 70 gun had a large, what we call billboard markings on the side. Quite honestly, not very attractive. But overall, pretty nice guns. One of the complaints with the Colt government model, remember, a gun made in, this gun right here, this 1966 government model pistol that I bought, was made on the same machinery this gun was made in World War II. Colt had not replaced hardly anything. As a matter of fact, there was still equipment in the Colt factory that was was still in use that was made in the 1920s. But the machinery was wearing out, and to be honest with you, the fit of the guns started to deteriorate to the point where a lot of people complained about the accuracy of the Colt government models. So what Colt did to make the Series 70 pistol the Series 70, most people don't get this. The big thing that made it a Series 70 pistol was they fitted a collet bushing. This was what made it a Series 70. The bushing is made out of spring steel. It's got fingers on it. So what happens is when the gun goes into battery, those steel fingers grab the barrel and hold it very uniformly. The result was the Series 70, Mark IV Series 70 pistols with this barrel were exceptionally accurate. Everybody loved them because they shot so well. But overall, the rest of the guns, we started to see, just simply because of that, a lot of that machinery was wearing out. You saw things that started to become a problem. But the secret to the Series 70 was the collet barrel and bushing. Now, some of the things that started to suffer machine-wise, for example, finding a pistol that the sear pinhole and the hammer pinholes were parallel became more and more of a problem. You can imagine, if they're not perfectly parallel, getting a sear hammer engagement to give you a nice crisp trigger pull became somewhat more problematic. Now this gun is probably a 1976 gun, and the trigger's got a little creep in it. Now, I didn't bring it because it's not something I really wanted to dwell on, I'll be honest with you. The reason I didn't bring it is I forgot it. But the Series 80 guns came out, and what made the difference between a Series 70 and 80 was internal firing pin safety. If you take a Colt 1911 pistol, and they still make them today, if you look in there and there's a little round plunger, that's a firing pin safety system. And Colt designated Series 80. That means it's got a firing pin safety. By the way, it's a trigger activated firing pin safety. In late 1930s, Colt came up with a firing pin safety system on the government model called the Swartz firing pin safety. And the way it worked is you had to depress the grip safety to deactivate the firing pin safety. Well, after World War II, they never started it up again. They never did. And a lot of people wondered why. And it's real simple. It sucked. Because in order to deactivate that firing pin safety, you had to completely depress the grip safety. And if you're a 1911 guy, you know that a lot of times, depending on your grip, you don't get it all the way depressed, which means your gun won't go bang. There are other manufacturers today that use a grip safety or Swartz style firing pin safety system, let's say like Kimber. And on those guns, if you don't have the grip safety absolutely totally depressed, the guns won't fire. Now, so if you got to have a firing pin safety system on your Colt or on your 1911, I recommend a Colt. And by the way, the new Colts, now that they've went to CNC machinery, their Series 80 type firing pin safeties work great. Matter of fact, I've got 2 or 3 of them, and if I handed you the gun, I guarantee you couldn't tell it was in there. Now, when they first introduced it in the 80s on the old machinery, quite honestly, they were somewhat of a problem. But the big thing to remember is a Series 70 gun has a collet barrel and bushing. That's what makes it a Series 70. Now, fast forward to somewhere after the turn of the century, Colt, first off, moved into using CNC machinery. As a matter of fact, you go to the factory today, you'll find old machinery that's still been around since World War II is still in use, and you'll find the latest state-of-the-art CNC. So they've kind of married it. Parts that don't need upgrades precision-wise are still made in the old machinery. But things like slides and frames, for example, barrels, all that stuff is made in very modern equipment, so the tolerances and alignment is state-of-the-art. They make the best 1911 pistols today they've made in 35 years. Now, they marketed a gun recently as a repro of the Series 70. It's got the Series 70 logo. It does not have the collet barrel and bushing, but they sell it as a Series 70, which is, quite honestly, when I worked for Colt a couple of years ago, it's one of the first things I brought up to them is, why do you call this gun a Series 70? It's not. Colt's mindset is, if it's got a firing pin safety in it, it's a Series 80. If it doesn't, it's a Series 70. That's the way they made the determination. Sadly, they marketed the Series 70 with a standard barrel and bushing, so it's not a real Series 70. So we ended up with a gun that has a hideous, ugly roll stamp on it, and it's not a Series 70. So when I went to Colt, one of the things I brought up to Justin Baldini, one of my buddies, super good guy, is why don't you, if you're going to make a repro, why don't you put the pre-Series 70 roll stamp on it, because it doesn't have the Series 70 collet barrel and bushing in it. Well, I can report that 3 years or 4 years later, they've just brought out what they call the Colt 1911 Classic. And if you look at the gun, it looks like, in many ways, if you look, it looks very much like the gun from yesteryear. Now, a couple points. This gun came with a plastic flat mainspring housing, nylon, nothing wrong with it. It came with a short trigger, which it should have. It's actually an aluminum shoe, which is fine. And it came with these really actually attractive 1911 pattern diamond checkered stocks, and they're actually very attractive. That's what came on it. But being one of these old guys that's got boxes of junk I've accumulated over the years, I dug out an original steel short trigger, a steel arch mainspring housing, and a pair of original Colt pre-Series 70 plastic stocks to bring it up to date. Changes on this gun. A couple ones you need to be aware of. One, ejection port slightly lowered, very slightly lowered. Compared to a standard government model, if you look, the ejection port is just, maybe an eighth of an inch lower. And there's a reason for that. People say, well, you need to lower the ejection port in your 1911 pistol for reliability. Totally bogus crap. The ejection port never had anything to do with reliability. And this is a gun culture myth that's been going on for practically 30 years. The reason ejection ports are lowered is because of those of us that shoot a lot reload. And if you look at cases that are fired, and by the way, that are fired through a non-lower ejection port, look at the dent in the mouth of the cartridge case. And if you're a reloader, those are a problem. You've got to iron them out before you can run them through the sizing die, which means a very slow and tedious problem. So what everybody started doing is taking a gun of this era and machining the ejection port lower so that your cartridge cases, fired cases, don't have that big dent in them. That's the reason for the change. So when somebody says, oh, well, no, that's for reliability, trust me, if the ejection port height was a problem for reliability, it would have been fixed in 1912. Okay, figure that one out. So I know somebody will get on the comment page of this video and want to claim that it has something to do with reliability, and that's bullshit. And if you state that it is, you're just making yourself look like a fool. It's purely about ease of reloading brass. But this new gun has a slightly lowered ejection port to minimize damage to the brass. Also, if you look at an original pre-gun, you'll notice it's got a narrower hood. The hood, the area right here on the barrel, is narrower than on the previous guns. But almost all the Colts now have standardized the narrow hood because remember it was first done for the gold cuts, which had a rib on them. And then in the Series 80s guns and 90s, they went to a narrow rib, and now it's almost universal across the line of the Colt. Now, the plus to it is all these guns now come with a stainless Colt National Match fitted barrel, which means now you're going to get a barrel that is fit up beautifully. It's got a, trust me, super accurate barrel, throated, feed like a champ. Also, one of the things that Colt has done, this gun, by the way, I checked it, it's right about 5-pound trigger. The current guns have higher sights. One of the drawbacks to the old pistols is the sights were lower and kind of hard to see, especially as your vision starts to deteriorate with age. So the higher profile sights are a plus. Overall, a nice gun. Now, if you look carefully on the new 1911 Classic, the disassembly notch, which on the earlier guns is about a ½ inch back from the slide lock notch, this has now been moved back, if you look, to almost 1 1/8 back farther or from the notch. And you go, why? Simply because it makes the gun easy to disassemble. That's the reason they did it. Most people today that are around 1911s don't take them apart by releasing the bushing and turning the bushing and taking the plug out. Most of us take them apart like they're a Browning high power. You bring it back to disassembly notch, pump the slide stop out, take your slide off. It's 2 units. So that's the reason that change was made. Has little to do with anything else. It simply just makes disassembly simpler. But what I've got, especially with putting a steel mainspring housing on it, which by the way Ed Brown sells them, the stocks like this, these are original Colt stocks. Check out, Google up Vintage Grips. They make a repro of these stocks in urethane, which is a much better material. Trouble with the original stuff is the plastic tends to shrink, and a lot of stocks you'll see where it's actually shrunk away from the grip screws. Some of them actually crack. So the new ones from Vintage Grip Company will bring you up to state. They make them in a dark brown and kind of an orangish brown. You don't need a steel replacement trigger. The one that comes in is fine, but there are people that sell these for replacements. So the new gun, Colt Classic Series, kind of answered a request that Larry Vickers and myself and other guys had voiced to Colt about make it the way it should be. By the way, currently blued steel 45. They will soon be available in stainless, and then eventually stainless and blue and 38 Super. That's coming. But cool gun. If you want to build a custom 1911, man, as far as I'm concerned, this is the perfect gun to build on. It's a classic Colt with the slide markings that look good instead of the Billboard Series 70 stuff. So, new gun, new configuration. We're going to shoot it in a minute. I'm impressed. Trust me, if you want a classic, cool 1911 pistol that looks the way it is and with some improvements, with a better barrel, better accuracy, overall, Colt Classic 1911, check it out. Okay, gang, here we are. I'm at Dave Morelli's secret mountain bunker. High in the Rockies, beautiful July day, sunny, blue sky, some nice clouds, great day to run some rounds. I'm going to take the Colt Classic 1911. I'm going to run a magazine here at about 15 yards to see how the thing performs. I'm shooting Federal 230 grain hardball. Now, I'll be honest with you. When I got this gun, it worked, but the ejection pattern was lame, to say the least. Unfortunately, one of the dings on Colt firearms is they do not adjust extractors in the pistols. They just drop them in. And this one was a typical drop-in fit, which meant the ejection pattern was terrible, and every once in a while it would leave the last case laying on top of the follower of the magazine when it's at slide lock. Always a bad sign. So remember, among the things in a 1911 pistol that must be fit as an extractor, sadly Colt has forgotten that. I did adjust extractor. One day in the future, Dave and I are going to do a short segment on how do you adjust extractor on a 1911 pistol properly. By the way, it's the weak link in the pistol. That's the one problem that has always haunted a 1911. Bottom line, I tweaked it, adjusted a little bit. Let's see how it runs. Winchester 230 grain hardball. Excuse me, Federal 230 grain hardball. You know, in this sunlight and this front sight, a little fuzzy for me, but overall not bad. I'm shooting 6 o'clock. I did yank one low, but overall shoots pretty good. I'll tell you what, the round that always gets people kind of interested in how well the 1911 works is the factory 185 grain match Wadcutters. Remember, these guns were not intended to work in a standard GI pattern pistol, but with this new National Match barrel and throated chamber, let's see how this 185 match Wadcutter shoots in the new Classic. Matter of fact, I'm going to have my buddy Dave run it and see how it goes. We'll watch and see how this pistol functions. I was about right there. There you go. You can just say, hey, okay, Dave, run the Wadcutter and see how it does.
All right. Man, I love these.
It's got about a 5-pound trigger, Dave.
All right. Well, I got one pulled, huh?
Yeah. All right, well,
that's not so bad.
Pretty good. Now, that gun ran flawlessly with 185 Wadcutters, which typically is not the norm.
Right.
Good sign about this particular pistol.
Felt good, and that 5-pound trigger's nice and crisp.
Yeah, it is.
It's
So,
just really nice.
hey, let's go check out our targets, Dave.
Okay, sounds good. There you go. Okay, Ken, there's your target here.
Okay, and you know, from about 15 yards, lighting conditions at all, I'm an old geezer now.
I noticed the same thing, the way the sun was hitting it made the sight
Obviously,
hard.
this was me. I know I did that one. I
Right.
remember exactly. It was a little bit of that. But as far as point of impact, I'm holding 6 o'clock. That's pretty good. I'm happy. I got no excuses for that one. Don't know when it happened, but let's check out yours with the Wadcutter.
Okay, group-wise, I'm happy, but I started moving over here. I made this one. I knew I pulled this one off. Then I got back over here, and then I pulled off again. But I don't like blaming stuff for what I do, but I gotta say that sun on the sight didn't do me any good.
And remember, where the sun's coming this direction.
Right.
You can't just move your groups away from the sun.
But I'd say at 15 yards, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Defensive group.
Check out the new Colt Classic 1911 government model, actually A1 government model. I think it's a pretty cool gun.
We're gonna shoot it some more.
Let's do it. Hey, check it out. See you the next time.
Dave Morelli here. Stay on channel, stay on tune, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.